On March 10th, 2023, the largest bank failure since the Great Recession occurred. I'm referring to the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, which many of you may have heard about. Today, I'm going to be explaining some of the things that led up to the collapse of this bank and the effect that those things had. So, based on my research, the Silicon Valley Bank collapsed due to their reliance on the growth of startup companies, rising interest rates, and the uncertainty that was caused when the economic climate shifted suddenly on them. So what was unique about Silicon Valley Bank was how much they catered to startup companies, venture capital funded tech companies, and the likes. Now, according to ABC News, between 2020 and 2022, Silicon Valley's bank deposits tripled, based on these companies being able to receive large amounts of funding, also the economic boom that occurred during this time, which is much of the reason why we saw so much inflation. A lot of people were at home with a lot of excess money, unlike years prior, which in turn led to more spending and more companies being profitable, further increasing their deposits at Silicon Valley Bank. Now, when we got into 2023, the economic climate and spending began to slow down, which meant that Silicon Valley Bank was no longer receiving as many deposits as they were previously, and suddenly were having more withdrawals than they were. So this led to them needing to come up with some cash on hand in order to cover these withdrawals. Now, Silicon Valley had purchased a lot of bonds in years prior, which are typically safe investments that return a guaranteed rate. These bonds, according to the United States Treasury, were purchased with returns that were giving Silicon Valley Bank around 1% to 2% interest payouts per year. And in 2023, the same bonds could be purchased and return about 4% to 5% per year. So when Silicon Valley Bank all of a sudden had to sell a large portion of the bonds that they owned, they did so at a loss because they were selling bonds that returned only 1% to 2%, whereas you could right now buy bonds that sell 4% to 5%, making the bonds that Silicon Valley Bank sold not worth very much. So they did this at a $1.8 billion loss, and on March 8th, they announced this to the public, and according to Forbes magazine, within 2 days, this led to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. Now, what happened there was people who were depositing money into the bank found out that they sold all these bonds at such a loss, which is indicative of underlying issues with the bank. So people got the idea that maybe their money was no longer safe in this bank. So they quickly, based on this uncertainty, began to withdraw their money from the bank. When some people did this, it made other people worried that maybe those people know something they don't, on top of the bad news that they do know about, and everybody just began to pull their money out as quickly as possible. So ultimately, because of the reliance on the continued growth of startup companies, which all of a sudden slowed down, and they now were withdrawing more money than what was being deposited in the bank, and rising interest rates making the bonds that they had worth less money, this led to uncertainty in their deposits, which made people execute a run on the bank, and that just causes panic and makes other people do the same thing. Based on this panic, Silicon Valley Bank, within 2 days of announcing their major loss, collapsed and had to be taken over by United States regulators.